Okay, magandang umaga sa inyong lahat. I can actually say magandang umaga because it's actually about 11 a.m. my time. I'm recording this one so that when I'm out of state, spending time with family next week, that you will be able to watch this. So unfortunately, we won't be able to do this live, but I hope you can understand still and learn much from it. And that you still are very alert and pay good attention, even though we're not going to be interacting so much in class, okay? If you watch this at the time of the normal theory class time, you could even, if you need to discuss things with a classmate, you could potentially put something in the chat as long as you're not distracting yourselves with that. But in case you need to ask each other a question, feel free, if you have questions about this or comments, after you watch it, you can message me or email me and let me know what that is, okay? So we have some fun things we're gonna work on today, and I hope they'll be helpful to you all. So we'll start by praying and then we'll get started. Father, thank you for this day that you've given to us and for the opportunity to have this class. I pray that you'll give the students good understanding and that you give me wisdom in my teaching and help them as they continue to work towards learning modulations, and that you would give them a better understanding through this class of how to be able to even analyze modulations as well as be able to write them. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, so we're gonna try to start where we left off the other day. So I will share my screen with you all, and we'll look at a few more examples of modulations, and we'll talk about some other things, okay? See. Okay, I'm gonna play this example for you. And I want you to see if you can figure out something about how she's actually accomplishing this modulation, okay? Okay, so what do you notice? We're coming from the key of E flat, okay? And we're going to the key of B flat. So what is our key relationship there? Well, we're going up by a fifth. Okay, so E flat to B flat. Do we have an actual pivot chord? That would be one question we would ask. Do we have a pivot chord anywhere in there? Okay, well, right here, we see that we have just a one chord in our original key of E flat, okay? Here we have a new chord. So the question is this diatonic? And is it diatonic in both keys? Okay. We can easily do a pivot modulation from E flat to B flat. Pero is that what she chose to do here? Actually, she ended up doing an abrupt modulation. It kind of has a surprise effect, okay? If you notice this actually is non-diatonic in the key of E flat, okay? We have an E natural. That should be an obvious sign to us right away that it's not diatonic in the key of E flat. Now the question is it diatonic in the key of B flat? No, it's also non-diatonic in the key of B flat. Okay, well, how can we analyze this chord then? Well, it's actually a secondary chord in the key that we're going to, which in this case is B flat, okay? Now, if I pull up my little handy dandy pen here, let's take a look at what the notes are in the chord. We have E natural, G, B flat, and D. E, G, B flat. What kind of chord is that? Well, that's an E diminished triad, diba? Tapos we have E up to D as our seventh, okay? So E up to D is a minor seventh. Okay, so this is some sort of E minor, E half diminished seventh. Okay, the question is, how does it actually fit into this key? Well, we said it's some sort of secondary chord. So it's a 7 diminished, sorry, I'm so slow. 7 diminished, and that's actually half diminished because we have a minor seventh. 7 half diminished, 7 of what? Well, this is our root. The root of a secondary leading tone chord. Remember, the root is like the temporary leading tone. Okay, so in that case, we would take a look at what would be a half step above that leading tone to see what it's tonicizing. Okay, in this case, that would just be F. Okay, well, in the key of B flat, what is an F major triad? Key of B flat, that would be a 5. So this looks like it's 7 half diminished 7 of 5 in the new key. Okay, it's non-diatonic in this key. Okay, it's non-diatonic in this key as well, but we actually see that it is a secondary leading tone chord in the new key. Remember when we were looking at some other things for abrupt modulations, we sometimes saw that it was maybe a secondary, maybe leading tone chord, but maybe it was in the old key that it was actually secondary, and it was leading us to the tonic of the new key. In this case, this is actually a secondary leading tone chord in the new key. And let's look at where it leads us. We might expect that it's going to take us to 5. But in this case, what does it take us to? What's the chord that comes in measure 4D? Well, the chord that comes in measure 4D is actually not F major, it's B flat major. Pero it's a 1, 6, 4. Okay, sometimes, and I don't know if we've looked at this last sem or not, pero there's different ways for secondary leading tone and secondary dominant chords to resolve. Sometimes a chord that looks like it's tonicizing the 5 can actually tonicize a 1, 6, 4. Remember, 1, 6, 4 often has a dominant function, okay? In this case, this is actually like a pedal tone, a dominant pedal tone. And we have the 1 chord over the dominant pedal tone, and the dominant pedal tone continues and continues and continues as far as we can see for the first 3 measures of this new key, okay? So the idea is that in this case, it's still, this E is still taking us to F, pero the chord set the as is actually the 1, 6, 4. Okay, it's the 1 chord, pero in this case, it's the 1, 6, 4. Kasi may F sa bass, okay? So hopefully that's kind of clear. Let me play it one more time for you. Okay, isn't that cool? I think it's a really cool sound. Now, let's think about how else she is modulating. So we might think, well, this E half diminished 7 chord, 7 half diminished 7 of 5 does not fit in the E flat key. And that's true, okay? Pero let's look at how she's getting to that chord. Remember, an abrupt modulation is not necessarily that it sounds super abrupt, like where did that come from? I have no idea. That sounds like we just put 2 weird chords together that don't go from one to the other, okay? It shouldn't be that way. It should sound like it makes sense, but maybe it has a surprise, but it's a nice surprise, okay? Maybe your friend buys you turon for merienda after class. That's a nice surprise. They walk up to you and say, I have something for you. And it's kind of in a package or something. Maybe you can't see it. And they pull it out and you say, oh, thank you, it's turon, I love this, it's my favorite, okay? Well, what if your friend comes up to you and they give something to you? Okay, or maybe it's Evan Backrick. For a little while, he was walking around with surprises for people. Or maybe it wasn't a surprise that they enjoyed that much. Maybe it was like a fake piece or something like that, okay? When you see that kind of surprise, you're like, oh no, that's not a pleasant surprise. But we want these to be pleasant surprises. If it's kind of an abrupt or surprise modulation, it should be pleasant, not just like, oh no, I don't want to see that, okay? So what she's doing is she's going from the one of the old key. We've already finished the stanza. She's doing a little motivic modulation type of thing. And this actually comes from the melody. Right? Okay. Now, she is going to just go up a half step. Okay. This is, if we play those two, sabay, just back to back. Do you realize that we have one note, the E flat just goes up by a half step to the E natural. Tapos, the note at the top of the left hand is just a G, and that remains the same. Okay, now the right hand. Sorry, I'm on the right hand. She's actually repeating the same melodic idea, but taking us now to this new chord. And the G, A flat, B flat motivic idea, melodic motivic idea, actually turns into now G, A, B flat, because that's what's in the new key. Walang A flat, so B flat, major, okay? So, and then she repeats this, okay? Then that becomes the pickup to the next stanza, because that actually is the pickup. It's in the chorus, as well as an idea that we hear in the stanza as well, okay? So even though it's maybe a surprise sound, she's getting there very, very, very smoothly. The bass is essentially ascending by half steps. If you go from the downbeat of every measure, that's what the bass is doing. And the right hand is super smooth too. So it's a nice surprise, but we don't feel like I never, you know, it doesn't make sense. It does make sense because of how she's getting there, okay? So hopefully that's helpful. I think that's a cool example. I personally like that one. Okay, now we have to clear these out so that I can go to the next slide. Okay, here's another one. Take a look at what he's doing in this one. Sorry about the blue picture. I took it when it was kind of darker outside. Okay, that's a surprise kind of, but it's a good surprise again, okay? Now, this is a similar concept. So he's actually going one in the old key. In this case, these two keys are actually not closely related, okay? It's going one and then 6 and then 2, okay? And this is a common chord progression. We see 6 and then 2, 7. Then this 2 becomes a diminished 2, from a minor 2, which is diatonic, to a diminished 2. Okay, that's the essential chord progression he's using. Now, notice that our 2 going to the diminished 2, all that had to change was one note. It changes because he puts it up the octave. Okay, but it was the same essential chord. The only thing he did was take the D and flat it to make it diminished. Okay, now this chord becomes, do you hear how this feels like going to go here? Again, we have 7 half diminished 7 chord of the new key, 5 of the new key. Pero the question is, where is it going in the new key? Where is it going in the new key? Okay, we might expect it to go to the 5. Because this, after all, is 7, half diminished 7 of 5 in the new key. Okay, so it's harder to see the diminished feel or the leading tone effect in this case because we don't have a G natural sitting right here. It is G natural because of the key we're coming from. Pero this is still a half step below what it's trying to tonicize. Okay, or what it's trying to go to, which actually is the 5, it's sol of the new key. Pero this is the key of D flat. Okay, and in the key of D flat, we would expect that this would go to an A flat major chord if it was going to the 5. Pero in this case, it does resolve up to A flat. Did I say A flat major? So it should be A flat major is the new dominant. Okay, it does resolve up to A flat, pero it's actually a 1-6-4 again in the new key. Okay, so this is kind of giving a little bit of a pedal effect, maybe we could say. Sorry, that's a weird 6. Okay, so just keep in mind that in this case, he's taking a minor 2 of the old key, turning it into what looks like a minor or a 2 half diminished 7 in the old key, which is non-diatonic, okay? So again, we don't actually have a pivot chord at all because this one, we might think that's the pivot chord, pero that's non-diatonic in the key of D flat, okay? And then he's going to 7 half diminished 7 of 5 of the new key, but then this leading tone is not resolving to, it's not taking us to a 5 chord, it's taking us to a 1-6-4, which can have a dominant function. And the main thing is that this leading tone, temporary leading tone, which actually becomes the new, it's like the leading tone to the new 5, right? Is taking us to that right there, okay? To the 1-6-4. Okay, if you didn't catch that all, hopefully we'll have another chance to look over some other things like that. Okay, common tone modulations. This is where we have a tone, a note that is the same from the key we're coming from to the key we're going to, okay? And that common tone is part of the tonic chord in both keys, okay? It'll be a different part of that tonic chord, but let's say do maybe becomes sol in the next one, but they're both part of the tonic chord somehow, okay? Now, if we're talking about diatonic modulations using a common tone, we can do this by if we're going up a perfect 4th, okay? Let me set this real quick. I thought I set my timer, Kanina, but I think it didn't work very well. So, okay, I think this should work. Okay, so going up a perfect 4th, if the song begins on the 5th, okay, so for instance, if it's like sol, do, we have a pickup on sol of the new song we're going to, okay, or whatever song, the new key where we're going to with the new key. Okay, the 1 chord of the first key is actually the 5 chord of the second key. Let's say we're going from G major to C major. That's up a perfect 4th. Okay, let's say that when we get to the song in C major, we have a sol, do idea going on and a pickup on sol. In that case, the 1 chord of the first key is the 5 chord of the second key. The 1 chord in G is G, okay? And we're going to C. The 5 chord in C is G. Okay, so the 1 chord is the same as the 5 chord. And then do equals sol. Okay, we're going from G. We've just finished our 1 song, or the end of that song, on the tonic chord, right? On the G major chord. And now we're going to end up trying to go to C major. So we're going to want to end up on the tonic chord pretty quickly. Common tone modulations, you can get there pretty quickly, okay? But that G, our tonic, our do, is actually the pickup note or the sol for the next key. So we've just finished G, and then we repeat the G. Okay, and then we end up right away in C major. We don't have to add any fancy chords at all. We don't even have to add the seventh of the one to get there, okay? So this is pretty cool. But remember, this might not work very well unless you have this, this pickup note that's actually sol. Okay, that makes it smoother. There might be ways to do it still without that pickup note, but that's what gives you that common tone. And you hear that common tone at the end, and then you hear it right away as the pickup to the next measure, the next downbeat, okay? So you can go directly to the new key, but keep the common tone, sa taas, okay? The main thing is you want to keep the common tone in the upper voice, so that's what we're going to hear probably most likely is kind of a melodic idea, okay? Here's an example. We're going from F to B flat, up a perfect fourth. Okay, so we're going up a perfect fourth, and our pickup, I love to tell. Okay, in this case, he speeds it up. But this pickup note is sol in the new key, and it's do of the old key. So he just adds a little bit of fancy stuff in here for forward motion, whatever, to kind of make it feel like it finishes out the first stanza. And then he's going to go to the second stanza by just repeating that note, that do, which is actually the pickup to the next stanza. Okay, pretty cool. Here's another example. We're going from G to C, which is what I mentioned kanina. Big fancy chord progression. Okay, actually what he does is he just finishes it out on tonic. And he repeats tonic. I have a song I love to sing, right? And he's changing meter, which makes it kind of cool. But the main thing is that all he's doing is finishing out on tonic, and then the pickup is sol for the next key, which is do of the first key, and he just repeats it, and then it propels him right into the next key. Okay, isn't that cool? It doesn't sound overly abrupt. It sounds like it makes sense. To my ear, it makes sense. But it's not something that we would maybe expect to make that much sense. Here's another one. This is kind of a different type of example. This is actually not a common tone example. This is the same piece, but later on. Sorry. Okay, what is he doing? Well, he finishes out on tonic. You might say, okay, he finishes on C, and then the very next chord, the pickup, has a C in it. Well, it does, but what part of the chord is that? It's actually the seventh of the chord, okay? And in the new key, this chord is actually the 5 chord. Remember, if we're talking about common tones, the goal is to actually have the common tone be part of the tonic chord in both keys, okay? So that C is not part of the tonic chord in the key of G, okay? What's happening here is he just finishes it out, and then he ends up going directly to the 5 of the new key. This would be a very abrupt modulation. We wouldn't want to use this all the time, okay? He's just going up a 4th or a 5th. We wouldn't want to use this all the time, but in this case it works, and he gives us a little bit of time to breathe. Do you see the little breath mark? He wants to close it out and then have a little bit of silence, and then he just jumps into the next key with 5-1. Okay? So that's not something you would use maybe that much, but it's interesting. It's kind of cool, and it's part of the same song, so I thought I would show it to you. Okay, that is the end of that one. Now I'd like to show you something else. We're going to look over the homework from what you passed for the diatonic modulations. And then we'll talk about chromatic modulations in the remaining time, okay? Whatever time we have left, which probably won't be too much. Okay, here's someone's homework. I'm not telling you who did what. You'll probably recognize your own. Hopefully you'll recognize your own. I already gave you some comments on Google Classroom. And some of my comments that I'm giving you now might be slightly different, but overall they'll probably be generally the same. So some of these were actually pretty close to what we're looking for, but maybe we can tweak it just a little bit to make it better, okay? Or give you another option. Some of them were a little bit farther off and might need a little bit more work, but in general, you're on the right track. So I wanted to go through these so that you can have a better idea of how to actually write this. So if you're auditing this class long, then maybe just try to go past the slides that say homework on them, okay? I'll play this for you. Okay, so what do you think? Does that seem like it's pretty smooth? I'll just start from. Actually works pretty well. Now the question is, what is our chord progression? We're trying to use a pivot chord modulation in this case. Okay, so what is our chord progression? Well, our pivot chord that we're trying to get to is A minor, 6 of the old key and 2 of the new key. Now, do you notice how we actually got there already by just repeating the opening melodic line and using the chord that was given, just a normal harmonization of this, right? So here we have our 6 in the old key, 2 of the new key. Okay, so the question partly is there some way that we can maybe use this as our pivot chord? We don't actually have our pivot chord till right here, I think, is what this person was thinking, that maybe that was more the pivot chord. And that sort of works, but what I'm wondering is if we can kind of clear out some of this, all these chord progressions, all these quick chord changes, like every beat that are happening right here. And if there's a way to maybe extend, potentially, this pivot chord idea into the next measure, or somehow do something different so that maybe we're not quite, we're not getting to the pivot chord and then jumping away from it and then coming back to it, okay? This could work. I'm not saying it doesn't work, but let's just look for maybe some other options. Okay, and so the essential chord progression, it's fine, it's good. Okay, so I'm just gonna start from where they went. Da, 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 da. So notice what they did. They stopped on tonic, like we normally would at the end. Then they come back in with the pickup note to the first phrase. And basically the melody that they're using for their interlude is mostly just this first melody from the first phrase all the way up to here, right? Da, 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 da. That's normally how we would do it. So my question is there a way we can take this, this pivot chord, extend that into the next measure? Is there a way that we can keep this descending melodic line to continue like we normally would hear it, but use that to set us up for the 5 chord? Okay. So also notice from the 2/7 of the new key up to the base of the 5 of the new key, I'm actually stepping up. We have contrary motion between the hands, and we have stepwise motion to go into the 5 chord right away. Okay, so that it makes it smoother. Okay, what do you think of that? What I did was I just had basically a straight 2 chord, 6 chord of the old key, and then I stepped down like this person did, but not changing chords. I'm just making this a non-chord tone. The B is a non-chord tone. Now I'm adding the seventh. I'm adding the seventh to the 2 chord, okay, to make it a little bit more interesting. Also, I want to include the F sharp so that it sets us up better for the 5 chord. If I just did, that sounds a little weird. Also, when I get to the pickup for the new key, I decided just to use a pickup note, one single melodic note long. That way, when I get to the 1 chord on the downbeat, it sounds nicer than having 1, 1. Okay, the pickup note is actually still part of my harmony from the previous one. Okay, here's another one, and I'll play it for you, and then I'll give some possible options. First time, if you look at measure 5, my brain assumed that there was an F sharp in there. And I think that's what whoever wrote this one was thinking too, okay? But the problem is there is not an F sharp in there, and we need the F sharp somewhere in there to have a true 5 chord going to G. So be careful for that. Depending on where your key signature is actually changing, make sure that you need to add in your accidentals so that you're actually showing the correct chord, the chord that you're probably thinking in your mind, okay? One thing to watch out for is when we have non-chord tones, like for instance in measure 2, beat 4 here, this almost feels like we're changing maybe to a new chord of some sort. So it'd be better just to maybe just do a B na lang, patas, okay? Maybe no D in there. Otherwise, it doesn't feel so much like a non-chord tone. Once we have 2 non-chord tones, it feels like we're actually forming a new chord, but we don't have anything to support that in the bass. Okay, also watch out to make sure that we're including the third of the chord. In most cases, we're gonna want the third of the chord right away when we're changing to a new chord. So this one in measure 4 should actually have a G somewhere in there right away, okay? Now, the only chords we really need are the 2 going to the 5, 7. I would not throw the 5, 6 in quite so soon. Okay, I would rather hear the 2 for a full measure and then the 5, 7 for a full measure. I think that would work better. Now, one suggestion I had for this student was to maybe cut out measures 3 and 4 entirely. Okay, so let's look at this. What if we cut them out? In this case, I'm going to kind of change some things a little bit, other things too. I'm going to make this just really simple for now. Another thing I'll mention real quick before we move on, measure 6, beat 3. So we finally got to the 5, 7 chord, but the 7th is in the soprano part. The problem is that 7th feels like it needs to resolve down to a B, and we don't actually have a B right away in the melody. Okay, if we did, that can maybe work. Okay, in this case we don't though. So that's going to throw us off a little bit. And then the other thing is this G on beat 3 in the right hand, that's a non-chord tone. We're not really getting to the 1 yet until beat 4. So, and it doesn't really lead us smoothly to that. So if you want to have a non-chord tone, maybe that could work if it's leading us smoothly to the next melodic note. Okay, in this case it doesn't. So what we should do is just think only 5, 7 or 5, 7 with suspension, something like that. But maybe put the 7th maybe in the left hand alone, or even in the thumb, depending on how you're voicing those things. So notice what I did here. I just showed you the last measure of the melody. Okay, that's kind of simple. You probably want something more interesting than that. But my main focus for the homework is that you come up with something that gets us there smoothly. Doesn't have to be big and fancy. If you can incorporate some of the melody of one of the songs, that's great. If not, it's not the end of the world. Okay, my main idea is that you're getting the correct progression and that you're making it sound smooth because of how you're approaching it with stepwise motion. Sometimes in both hands, sometimes just in one hand, but probably especially approaching the new chords in stepwise motion as much as possible, okay, when we're getting to the new chord. And then you can create some little melodic idea, whether it's your own melody or a little bit of the melody from the hymn. Okay, here's another one. This one's mostly, or actually, okay, this is one that I think the student was thinking that it was supposed to be an abrupt modulation. Okay, but I'm going to show you how you could do an abrupt modulation. Remember, this is supposed to be a pivot chord modulation, but I just want to show you, okay, you could actually do a pivot or an abrupt modulation along, but how could we do it so that it's maybe smoother? Sorry, I'll play that measure 4 again. Okay. I like that there's some stepwise motion going on, and there's that little inner voice in the right hand that's working in measure 4. One thing that I would say is that it feels kind of like it comes too quickly. What I would do is for this one, I would not bring the 5 chord in quite so soon. I would give us time to be able to finish the 1 chord as a full measure, okay? And then I would do something to lead into the new 5 chord smoothly, okay? And give the new 5 chord a full measure. And then at the end of that measure, I would bring in the pickup note and the pickup note long, okay? Again, not the full chord until the downbeat. So we could do something like this. Or we could do 5 with suspension. If you add a suspension somehow to the 5 chord, so 4/3 suspension on the 5 chord, that gives us a little bit more of a pull to the 3rd of the chord, of course, and it also makes us feel like we have some sort of forward motion and we're not just like sitting on the 5 chord for a whole measure. You could do, okay, and that would work too. Okay, this next one is also pretty close with the pivot chord idea. When I played through it the first time, I thought something's really not right here. But then when I looked at it, I realized what the problem was, and that actually it wasn't such a huge problem, but to my ear it sounded really off. And I'll try to explain that to you, okay? And why that might be. Okay, I like how there's little bits of the melody in here again, just like the first one we had, the opening melodic idea. And again, that melody takes us to, it takes us to the pivot chord right there, which is nice, okay? And this student's showing, okay, here's the pivot chord, and then goes to the 5/7 of the new key, okay? Now, what I realized, what threw off my ear, is how long the 5/7 chord was. To me, when I hear the 6 chord or the 2 of the new key, and then the 5, and then the 5 again, the second time it has a suspension, which we don't really want to have the 3rd in the first measure of the 5 chord, and then go back to a 4, and then put the 3rd in again. That's probably another thing that's a little bit confusing to our ear. To me, what's happening is, I think that this 5/7 coming in, because of where it comes in and how long it lasts, I'm expecting it to be like a 5/5 maybe, and take us right away to G. That's kind of what I'm thinking is happening as far as why it sounds like it's not quite right. Okay, so I like how there's stepwise motion. Sorry, I'm on the wrong notes. Okay, feels like we're trying to go back to G, and we haven't actually switched keys. It feels like we should go back. It feels like we have 5/5 going to 5, which is going to take us back to 1 in C major. That's what my ear is hearing. So what if we did this? Let's keep the rest of it up until the point where we get to the 5 chord. I like the melodic line that happens on the 5 chord. the first measure of the 5 chord. That's nice, okay? Now the question is, can we actually extend the pivot chord for an extra measure? I would rather hear an extra measure of the pivot chord than the 5 chord for 2 measures in this case, because we're expecting that by the downbeat of the last measure that something's going to change. And that's what we're expecting to hear, the 5 chord in the old key in my mind, okay? I'm gonna start on measure 3. Okay, so again, this time I'm doing a 2 chord, repeating the 2 chord, but adding the 7th in it the next time to make it a little bit more interesting. I'm keeping the same melody that this person had, but I'm just putting different chords up above, okay? And then we don't get to the 5 chord until the measure before our melody comes in, or the measure that our melody pickup comes in on, okay? So hopefully that's helpful to you to think through different things and maybe ways to help your modulations and to show you, okay, yeah, this part's not working, but maybe we can change it just a little bit to make it work better. Here's another option. Okay, that's kind of close to how we fixed the last one. And this one just sort of has like a double suspension, retardation, that type of thing, okay? And basically I just elided this last measure with kind of the beginning of the melody idea to hopefully make that work a little better. Okay, here are some answers for how you could have changed back to rejoice in the key of C. Again, all you have to do is take that tonic chord, add the minor 7th somewhere in it, okay? And then that's going to lead you right back to the tonic of the next key, because this is the 4th relationship, okay? You could use a pivot chord. That's more complicated. That's great. It depends on what your goal is, but we're thinking about options. Sometimes we want just a super simple option. So, and then these are your options for pivot chords going from C minor to E flat major. And I think most of you, if not all of you, got this correct. Okay, reminders, go to the new 5 chord smoothly with the least amount of motion as possible. So have some sort of ascending, descending melodic line, something that's going to help you get there. Okay, use stepwise motion, use common tones. This is different than a common tone modulation, but maybe it's a common tone that's in somehow in the 2 overlaps between the 2 chords, something like that. Maybe between the pivot chord and the 5 chord. Okay, double check your accidentals. We already mentioned that, Kanina. Okay, a problem that we had last year was some people weren't including the pickup note of the new song. Make sure that you're including that. That's very important. And then again, maybe think about using the pickup note long and not the full chord so that the 1 chord comes on the downbeat. Okay, chromatic modulations. So we've talked about diatonic modulations and you are masters of that already. Actually, I'll give you some homework so that you can practice these things we talked about, and hopefully these will make a little bit more sense to you. And as we went through things that you can change, hopefully you can apply those to your next modulation. But a chromatic modulation, this is not entirely different, okay? Don't feel like, oh no, I have to learn an entirely new thing. There's still a lot of similar concepts, okay? But there's different key relationships. And so we'll talk about those. So a diatonic modulation is one where you go from a key to a closely related key. So remember, 1 notch over either direction on the circle of fifths. So every key has 5 closely related keys. Chromatic modulations are going to a key that's somehow more distant, okay? So something more distant than those close related keys that we talked about. This can be helpful for you, especially for something where you only have so many key options because of the range of the melody or the voice parts. Especially if you're writing for, like, let's say 2 parts, you have to keep it in a fairly narrow-ish range so that you know, your sopranos and altos can all sing 1 part, and your basses and your tenors can all sing 1 part. You don't have as wide of a range to work with, maybe. So in general, probably vocal music, the range might be slightly more limited because of our instrument that we're dealing with. So maybe we can't go, you know, to the key of the dominant. That's going to make the melody way too high or way too low or whatever, right? Okay, so we might end up going a little farther away as far as farther around the circle of fifths somehow, okay? So one example of this would be going a half step up. What do you think? Going from C major, half step up to D flat major, is that a closely related key or a distantly related key? Well, hopefully you realize that that's very different. If you just look at that key signature, we're adding all of a sudden 5 flats to it, right? Okay. So how can we actually get there? We feel like, oh, we can't probably modulate there or not in a very smooth way. Well, we actually could. And this is something that you could do to get there, okay? The idea is that we're trying to go to the 5 of the new key, okay? So the 5 of D flat is A flat major. And in this case, we'll add the 7. You could do just a super simple one and maybe have some sort of melodic line above, right? We have something like, okay, let's say this is our 5-1 in the old key, 5-1, then 5-1, right? Okay. Now, what if we're going from D flat and we're trying to go up to D major? Well, you can fill that in, okay? Basically, what you're doing is we're not actually doing, in this case, the 5 chord in its root position. The 5 chord ends up, we kind of are using like a common tone idea in the bass. Look at the very lowest note. The tonic of the first chord is becoming, or the root of the first chord is becoming the 3rd. It's the same as the 3rd of the 5 chord in our next key. But notice the very smooth motion. So we're using common tones between the chords and then just moving the upper note a half step up, okay? So I want you to fill out the other ones that are on your sheet. There's the answers, but try not to look at the answers as you fill them out. Okay, then we get here. This is another option of how to get to it. In this case, we're gonna actually go to the dominant in root position, okay? And in this case, we actually have something in both hands. Okay, 5-1, right? How are we getting from the root of our 1 chord in the first key to the root of our 5 chord of the new key? Well, we have to step down. And that's going down by whole steps. Okay, notice the right hand is also going to play part of the chord. We actually, since we have the root of the new 5 doubled in the left hand, our right hand chord doesn't necessarily need to play the root, okay? So it's just gonna play other chord tones, but we're using a lot of common tone and stepwise motion. Do you see that? We have the E and the G just going down by half step to E flat and G flat. And then just to really make sure that we hear that new dominant very clearly, you could go up and play the octave or just play a single note. Okay, and then we're in the key of D flat without having to do anything fancy. It's actually quite simple. Down by a whole step, down by another whole step, the left hand. Tapos, just common tone, stepwise motion, tatas, okay? And my timer is telling me I need to stop. So what I'd like you to do is fill out these other measures that are empty on your handout, okay? You could do this in MuseScore if it's easier, or hopefully soon you'll get your syllabus, which will help you. Okay, so this is essential idea. Bass steps are going down by a whole step and another whole step to the root of the new 5 chord. So we're going from 1 of the old key to the root of the new 5 chord, so to the 5 of the new key. And then directly, that brings us directly to the 1 of the new key. Okay, right hand is gonna use as little motion as possible, going to the new 5-7 chord, then it can repeat the new dominant on the octave, okay? And we'll talk about more next week, Lord willing. Check for your assignment information on Google Classroom. And you'll need to read through this handout and answer some questions about what you read, so that hopefully that will help you learn better. And then we'll talk about this for at least 1 more week, and then you'll definitely be a master at modulations. Someday. They can be challenging though, okay? But we're trying to at least give you some basics so that you have something to go off of. Okay, I will let you all go and move on with your day. Okay, take care. Ingat.